Get out! You're fired, bitch!
Over that badge and get out of my hospital.
The slap landed so hard that the sound cut through the emergency room before anyone could breathe. Alia Brooks did not fall. She did not scream. She only turned her face slightly, one hand still holding the blood-stained chart of the elderly man she had just saved. For 3 full seconds, Mercy Ridge Medical Center went silent. The heart monitors kept beeping. Rain tapped against the glass entrance. Somewhere behind the nurse's station, a phone rang and rang, but no one reached for it. Richard Whitman, the hospital's chief executive officer, stood inches from her in a charcoal suit that cost more than most nurses made in a month. His jaw was tight. His hand was still raised. His eyes were cold with the kind of anger that only comes from a man who believes power makes him right. "You are finished here," he said. His voice was low, but it carried across the room. Alia slowly looked back at him. Her cheek was already turning red beneath the bright white lights. She was 29 years old, wearing light blue scrubs, her dark curls pinned back in a loose bun. A rookie nurse, at least according to the badge clipped to her pocket. That was what Richard saw. A young black woman who had forgotten her place. A nurse who had stepped outside hospital protocol. A problem he could remove before dinner. "You treated an uninsured patient without approval," he said. "You bypassed intake. You ignored billing. You put this hospital at risk." Alia's lips parted, but she did not rush to defend herself. Across the room, Nurse Kelly Monroe stood frozen with a roll of gauze in her hand. Dr. Stephen Marshall looked down at the floor. A security guard near the sliding doors shifted his weight and pretended not to understand what he had just witnessed. Nobody moved. Nobody wanted to be next. The man in bed 3 tried to sit up. Isaiah Coleman, 68 years old, dark-skinned, gray-bearded, wearing an old military jacket damp from the rain. A fresh white bandage crossed his forehead, where Alia had stitched him less than 15 minutes earlier. "She helped me," he said. His voice was rough, but steady. Richard turned toward him with a sharp breath. "Sir, you need to lie back down. You fired her for helping me?" Richard gave a dry, humorless laugh. "She violated policy. She stopped the bleeding. She acted without authorization." Isaiah's eyes moved from Richard to Alia. He studied her face the way soldiers study a horizon before a storm. There was something in his expression now. Recognition. Not complete. Not yet, but close. Alia noticed it and looked away. She had spent years learning how to disappear after doing what needed to be done. Richard pointed toward the exit. "Security, take her badge." The guard hesitated. Richard's head snapped toward him. Now, the guard walked over slowly, shame written across his face. He did not meet Alia's eyes as she unclipped the badge and placed it in his hand. Her name faced upward. Alia Brooks. Registered nurse. Nothing on that badge said what she had done before Mercy Ridge. Nothing said how many men had once lived, because her hands did not shake. Nothing said that, in another life, commanders had waited for her call before moving an entire unit. Richard saw none of that. He only saw a nurse he thought he could break. Alia turned to Isaiah before she left. "Keep pressure off the wound," she said softly. "If your vision blurs or you feel dizzy, tell someone immediately." Isaiah swallowed hard. "You always this calm after being hit?" Alia gave him a tired smile. "No, sir," she said. "Only when the room needs me to be." Then she walked toward the sliding glass doors. The rain outside looked silver under the emergency lights. Her reflection followed her, across the polished floor, small and quiet beneath the hospital's towering walls. Behind her, Richard straightened his jacket as if order had been restored. But on bed 3, Isaiah Coleman reached into the inside pocket of his wet military coat. His fingers closed around his phone, and for the first time that afternoon, his calm looked more dangerous than Richard's anger. Isaiah Coleman did not dial fast. He dialed like a man who had learned that panic wastes breath. His thumb moved over the screen with slow precision, while Richard Whitman barked orders behind him. Nurses returned to their stations with their shoulders tight. No one wanted to look at the empty space where Alia had stood. The room had sound again, but it did not feel alive. It felt guilty. "Chief Coleman," a voice answered. Isaiah kept his eyes on the sliding doors where Alia had disappeared into the rain. "This is Coleman," he said. "I need Commander Hayes." There was a pause. Then the voice changed. "Sir, is this urgent?" Isaiah looked down at the blood drying on the sleeve of his military jacket. He touched the bandage above his eye, feeling the neat line of stitches beneath the gauze. "Yes," he said, "it is." At the far end of the emergency room, Richard was speaking to Dr. Stephen Marshall in a low, angry voice. "I want that chart flagged. No billing authorization, no insurance verification, no intake approval. I want a full report before the end of the day." Dr. Marshall nodded, but his eyes kept drifting toward the exit. Richard noticed. "Do you have something to say, Doctor?" Marshall swallowed. He was a good physician in quiet ways. The kind who stayed late, the kind who remembered birthdays. But he had a mortgage, 2 daughters in college, and a wife recovering from surgery. Courage did not come easily when a paycheck held an entire family together. "No, sir," he said softly. Richard stared at him for one more second, then turned away. That was how fear worked inside Mercy Ridge. It did not shout. It taught decent people to lower their eyes. Outside, Aaliyah stood beneath the narrow awning near the ambulance bay. Rain fell in hard, silver lines beyond the roof. It hit the pavement, bounced against the curb, ran in thin streams toward the storm drain. The cold air touched her cheek where Richard had struck her, and for the first time since it happened, her breath trembled. She pressed 2 fingers to the red mark. Not because of the pain. She had known worse pain. It was the insult that stayed, the way the room had watched, the way nobody had moved. She closed her eyes and leaned back against the brick wall. Her scrubs were damp at the cuffs. Her shoes squeaked slightly when she shifted her weight. Somewhere behind the emergency doors, a child cried. An ambulance siren wailed in the distance, growing louder, then fading away. Aaliyah knew that sound too well. Sirens in American cities. Alarms in desert darkness. The sharp command of someone calling medic. For a moment, Mercy Ridge disappeared. She was younger again. Dust in her mouth, smoke in the air. A man screaming for his mother, while she pressed both hands into a wound that would not stop bleeding. Her own heart pounding so hard she could hear it through the helmet. A voice over the radio asking if extraction was possible. Her answer had been calm then too. "Give me 2 minutes." 2 minutes had saved a life. 2 minutes had changed what people believed was possible. Now, years later, she had been fired for giving an old man less than that. The side door opened. Kelly Monroe stepped out, holding Aaliyah's jacket in both hands. She looked nervous, almost ashamed. "You left this inside," Kelly said. Aaliyah took it gently. "Thank you." Kelly stared at her cheek, then looked away. "I should have said something." Aaliyah did not answer right away. She looked at the rain. "You were scared," she said. Kelly's eyes filled. "That does not make it right." "No," Aaliyah said. "It just makes it human." Kelly wiped quickly under one eye. "He had no right to touch you." Aaliyah slipped her arms into the jacket. "Most people in power know exactly what they have no right to do," she said. "They just count on everybody else being too afraid to name it." Kelly looked through the glass door toward the emergency room. "What are you going to do?" Aaliyah gave a small, tired smile. "Go home, ice my face, figure out rent." She said it simply, but Kelly heard the weight under it. Inside the hospital, Isaiah's call connected. Commander Nathaniel Hayes came on the line. "Chief Coleman," he said. "Where are you?" "Mercy Ridge Medical Center," Isaiah replied. "Are you injured?" "A cut." "Nothing I have not survived before." "Then why are you calling me on this line?" Isaiah looked at Richard Whitman across the room. The CEO stood beneath the white hospital lights, proud, polished, certain the world still belonged to him. "Because the medic is here," Isaiah said. Silence followed. Then Hayes spoke again, lower now. "What medic?" Isaiah's eyes narrowed. "The one from Kandahar, the one who kept Reeves alive." The one we were told disappeared after discharge. Another pause. Then the commander's voice turned cold. Say her name. Isaiah watched rain streak the glass doors. Aliyah Brooks, he said, and they just fired her. Commander Nathaniel Hayes did not ask the question twice. He sat in a small operations office at Naval Support Activity. Hampton Roads, one hand resting on the edge of his desk, the other holding the phone against his ear. Around him, the room kept moving. Radios hissed. A printer clicked. A young petty officer crossed the doorway with a folder pressed to his chest. But Hayes had gone still. Aliyah Brooks. The name had pulled something old and heavy into the room. Chief Coleman, he said. Are you certain? Isaiah gave a quiet breath through the phone. I watched her hands. Nobody stitches like that unless they learned under fire. Hayes closed his eyes. For a second, he was not in Virginia anymore. He was back under a hard desert sky, kneeling beside a young Marine named Reeves, hearing the crack of gunfire over the ridge. He remembered a medic pushing past smoke with blood on her sleeves and command in her voice. Not loud, not afraid. Move his shoulder. Keep pressure. Do not let him sleep. That medic had been barely in her 20s then. Small frame, calm eyes, steady hands, the kind of calm that made grown men obey because they could feel she was carrying the room. Hayes opened his eyes. What happened? Isaiah looked toward the emergency room doors. Richard Whitman was now speaking with the security guard, pointing at a tablet, his face tight with irritation. He had no idea the ground was shifting under him. She treated me before intake, Isaiah said. The CEO slapped her in front of the staff and fired her. Hayes stood. The chair rolled back and hit the wall. The petty officer in the doorway stopped walking. Sir? He asked. Hayes raised one hand. Not now. On the phone, his voice lowered. Did anyone document the assault? There are cameras in the emergency room, Isaiah said. Plenty of witnesses. Whether they have the courage to tell the truth is another matter. Hayes looked out the window at the gray afternoon sky. Rain streaked the glass like thin scars. Keep her there if you can. She is outside, Isaiah said. In the rain. Hayes' jaw tightened. Of course she is. That was Aliyah, hurt in silence, helping others first. Leaving before anyone could thank her. Hayes turned to the petty officer. Get me Lieutenant Brooks from legal. Now, and call Aviation Medical Transport. Tell them I need priority movement to Mercy Ridge Medical Center. The petty officer blinked. Sir, is this a military medical emergency? Hayes looked at him. It became one the moment a decorated Navy medic was assaulted after treating a veteran. The room changed. People heard the tone. Heads turned. Nobody asked if he meant it. Hayes went back to the phone. Chief, listen carefully. Do not threaten anyone. Do not argue. Stay visible. Stay calm. Isaiah gave a faint laugh. I am old, Commander, not careless. Good, Hayes said, because men like him are always looking for a reason to make the victim look dangerous. Inside Mercy Ridge, the air had grown colder. Not from the weather, from what people refused to say. Kelly returned from the side entrance with red eyes. Dr. Marshall watched her cross the nurse's station. Did you see her? He asked quietly. Kelly nodded. Is she okay? Kelly looked at him with sudden anger. Are any of us okay after watching that? Marshall flinched. He looked toward Richard, then back to her. Kelly, keep your voice down. No, her whisper sharpened. That is the problem. Everybody keeps their voice down. A young nurse named Brianna stood nearby, pretending to sort medical tape. Her hands had been shaking since the slap. She had entered nursing school after her mother died in an overcrowded county hospital. She believed medicine was supposed to mean mercy, but today she had watched Mercy get escorted outside. Richard walked back toward the center of the emergency room. I want bed 3 discharged, he said. Immediately, Dr. Marshall stepped forward. Mr. Coleman should be observed for possible concussion. Richard turned slowly. Are you challenging my decision? Marshall's throat moved. His hands opened and closed at his sides. I am making a medical recommendation. Richard smiled without warmth, then put it in the chart, and put your name on it. That was all it took. Marshall looked down. Isaiah watched the exchange from his bed. His eyes were tired now, but not weak. He had seen this before. Different uniforms. Same fear. Good people trapped under bad command. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. Brianna rushed toward him. "Sir, please lie back." "I am fine," he said. "You may have a concussion. Then I will sit upright with dignity." She stopped. The way he said dignity made her eyes soften. Outside, Aaliyah pulled her phone from her jacket pocket. The screen was cracked at one corner. She stared at the contacts list, thumb hovering over her landlord's name, then over her sister's. She could already hear the questions. What happened? Did you report it? Are you safe? She did not know how to answer any of them. Then the ground began to tremble. At first, it sounded like thunder buried inside the clouds. Aaliyah looked up. The rain broke sideways. Across the parking lot, car alarms chirped. Nurses ran to the windows. Patients lifted their heads. Even Richard stopped speaking. The sound grew louder, harder, closer. A dark medical transport helicopter dropped through the low gray sky, its lights flashing through the rain. Aaliyah stepped out from under the awning. Breath caught in her chest. Inside the emergency room, Isaiah Coleman smiled for the first time. Richard Whitman stared through the glass doors. And for the first time that afternoon, he looked unsure. The helicopter did not land like a spectacle. It landed like a decision. Its skids touched down on the far edge of the visitor parking lot, where rainwater had gathered in shallow silver pools. The rotor wash bent the small trees near the entrance and sent loose paper cups skidding across the pavement. A patient in a wheelchair pressed both hands to his blanket. A paramedic stepped back and shielded his eyes. Aaliyah stood in the rain, frozen. She knew that sound, not from movies, not from news footage, from memory. The deep chop of blades cutting through bad weather, the rush of air against her face. The moment before a door opened and someone shouted for a medic. The side door of the helicopter slid open. Commander Nathaniel Hayes stepped out first, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark navy flight jacket over his uniform. Behind him came Lieutenant Grace Brooks from legal and two medical transport officers carrying black cases. Hayes did not look around like a man searching for permission. He walked straight toward the emergency entrance. Then he saw Aaliyah. For 1 second, the commander stopped. Rain ran down the side of his face. His eyes moved over her scrubs, her wet sleeves, the red mark on her cheek. His jaw tightened. "Aaliyah Brooks," he said. Aaliyah did not salute. She was not in uniform anymore, Commander Hayes. Her voice was calm, but something in it cracked at the edge. Hayes stepped closer. "Who hit you?" Aaliyah looked toward the glass doors. The answer was standing inside, watching them. Richard Whitman had come to the entrance with Dr. Marshall, Kelly, Brianna, and half the emergency staff behind him. The CEO looked irritated now, but there was fear beneath it. Not panic yet. Just the first cold taste of losing control. Richard pushed the door open and stepped out beneath the covered entrance. "I am Richard Whitman, Chief Executive Officer of this hospital," he said. "I need to know why a military aircraft has landed on private property without authorization." Hayes turned to him slowly. His voice stayed even. "I am Commander Nathaniel Hayes, United States Navy. This is a medical transport aircraft responding to a veteran welfare concern." Richard blinked. A veteran welfare concern does not require this kind of disruption. Lieutenant Brooks opened a black folder but said nothing. She was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed, with the patient expression of a lawyer who enjoyed letting arrogant men keep talking. Hayes looked past Richard into the emergency room. "Where is Chief Isaiah Coleman?" Richard stiffened. "The patient is under hospital care." Aaliyah said quietly. "He was stable when I left him." Hayes turned back to Richard. When she left him, he repeated. The words were calm, too calm. Richard forced a smile. "This nurse is no longer employed by Mercy Residge. She violated hospital policy by treating a patient before completing required intake procedures." Hayes stared at him. "And for that, you assaulted her?" The staff behind the glass went still. Richard's face changed. "I did not assault anyone." Kelly stepped forward inside the doorway. her hands clenched at her sides. She looked terrified, but something stronger than fear had finally found her voice. "Yes, you did." Richard turned sharply. "Nurse Monroe." Kelly swallowed hard. "You slapped her." A sound moved through the staff. Not loud, more like a held breath-breaking doctor. Marshall looked at Kelly as if she had stepped into traffic to save a child. Richard's eyes narrowed. "You need to be very careful." "No," Kelly said, her voice shaking now. "I already was. That was the problem." Aaliyah looked at her. For the first time that afternoon, her face softened. Hayes glanced at Lieutenant Brooks. She wrote something down. Richard pointed toward the building. "This is an internal hospital employment matter. You have no authority here." Lieutenant Brooks finally spoke. "Assault is not an internal employment matter, Mr. Whitman, and neither is retaliation against a licensed medical professional for providing emergency stabilization to a patient." Richard's mouth tightened. She broke protocol. Hayes took one step closer. "There are protocols written by people who never touch blood," he said. "And there are decisions made by the person standing closest to someone who might die. A good institution knows the difference." The words hit the entrance like a cold wind. Inside, Isaiah Coleman appeared near bed 3, standing with Brianna beside him. She was trying to keep him steady, but he waved her hand away gently. "I asked for the medic," Isaiah called. His voice carried through the open doors. Hayes looked at him, and something old passed between them. Respect, history, survival. "Chief Coleman," Hayes said. Isaiah nodded once. Then he pointed at Aaliyah. "That woman stopped my bleeding while your hospital argued with itself." Richard turned red. "Sir, you need to return to your bed." Isaiah looked at him with quiet disgust. "Do not call me sir now. You had plenty of time to respect me before she made you look small." The emergency room went silent again. But this silence was different. This time, Richard was the one standing alone. Richard Whitman tried to speak, but the room no longer belonged to him. That was the first thing he felt. Not fear exactly. Not yet. It was something sharper. The strange panic of a man who had built his whole career on people stepping aside, and now found that nobody was moving. Commander Hayes walked through the sliding doors, rain dripping from his flight jacket onto the polished hospital floor. Lieutenant Grace Brooks followed beside him, her folder tucked under one arm. Aaliyah came last. She did not look triumphant. That unsettled Richard more than anything. If she had smiled, he could have called it attitude. If she had raised her voice, he could have called it aggression. But she walked in quietly, with her hands at her sides, and her head lifted just enough to show she was not ashamed. The emergency room watched her return. Kelly stood near the nurse's station, wiping her palms on her scrubs. Brianna had tears in her eyes, but kept from falling. "Doctor." Marshall folded his arms tightly, as if trying to hold himself together. Even the security guard who had taken Aaliyah's badge looked down when she passed. Hayes stopped beside bed 3. "Chief Coleman," he said, "sit down before you prove every stubborn thing I have ever said about Navy chiefs." Isaiah gave him a dry look. "Good to see you too, Commander." "Sit," Hayes said again, softer this time. Isaiah sat. That small exchange broke something in the room, not the tension, the illusion. These were not strangers playing roles. They knew each other. They carried history together. Richard could see it now, and the knowledge made his mouth go dry. Lieutenant Brooks turned to Dr. Marshall. "Doctor, has Mr. Coleman been evaluated for concussion?" Marshall hesitated, then nodded. Initial exam was started. Observation was recommended. "By whom?" she asked. Marshall glanced at Richard, then straightened. "By me." Richard shot him a warning look. Marshall did not lower his eyes this time. Lieutenant Brooks wrote it down. Richard forced his voice into a professional shape. "This is becoming unnecessarily dramatic. Mercy Ridge has procedures in place for patient intake." Ms. Brooks ignored them. Aaliyah's eyes moved to him. Not angry, just steady. Richard hated the steadiness. Hayes turned slowly. "Tell me something, Mr. Whitman. If a man collapses outside your emergency room, bleeding from the head, what should happen first? A billing check or pressure on the wound?" Richard's jaw tightened. That is an oversimplification. No, Hayes said. It is the question. The monitors beeped behind them. Rain tapped the glass. Somewhere in the hall, a family member whispered a prayer. Richard adjusted his cufflinks. Emergency stabilization is important, of course. But hospitals cannot operate without protocols. Aaliyah finally spoke. Protocols should guide care. They should not delay it. Her voice was quiet, but every head turned. Richard pointed at her. This is exactly the problem. You believe your judgment is above the institution. Aaliyah took a breath. No, I believe a patient's life is above my comfort. The words landed hard. Kelly looked down. Brianna covered her mouth. Richard turned red. You are not some battlefield hero anymore, Mrs. Brooks. This is a hospital. We have liability. We have standards. The moment the words left his mouth, the room changed again. Aaliyah went still. Hayes looked at Richard with a coldness that made even Lieutenant Brooks pause. So you knew? Hayes asked. Richard blinked. Knew what? That she served. Richard's eyes flickered. He had not meant to reveal that. Not fully. Human resources files had shown veteran status. He had seen it when Aaliyah was hired. He had dismissed it as a line on a form. Military background, he said quickly. Does not exempt anyone from policy. Hayes stepped closer. No, it does not. But it should have taught you respect. Aaliyah looked away for the first time. Not because she was weak. Because some wounds are easier when strangers ignore them than when good people name them. Lieutenant Brooks opened the folder. Petty Officer Aaliyah Brooks served as a Navy hospital corpsman attached to a Marine unit in Afghanistan. She received a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for emergency care under hostile conditions. She was cited for stabilizing multiple casualties during an ambush and maintaining triage operations until evacuation arrived. The room went silent. Brianna whispered, "Oh my God." Richard's face hardened. With all due respect, that has nothing to do with this employment matter. Isaiah leaned forward from the bed. It has everything to do with it. His voice was rough now, older, heavier. I have seen men freeze when blood hit the ground. I have seen officers shout while medics worked. The best ones do not ask who can pay. They ask who is still breathing. Aaliyah kept her eyes on the floor. Hayes looked at her. You saved Reeves, he said. Aaliyah's jaw tightened. You saved Coleman today, she swallowed. And this hospital punished you for doing the same thing you were trained to do. Richard snapped. She exposed us to risk. Hayes turned on him. No, Mr. Whitman. You exposed this hospital to risk when you put your hands on her. The words cut clean. Richard looked around, searching for loyalty. He found witnesses. Kelly lifted her chin. I saw it. Brianna nodded, voice shaking. I saw it too. Dr. Marshall took a slow breath. So did I. The security guard stared at the badge still in his hand. Then he walked forward and held it out to Aaliyah. I am sorry, he said. Aaliyah looked at the badge. For a moment, she did not take it. Because getting a badge back was not the same as getting dignity back. But then she reached out. Her fingers closed around her name. And Richard Whitman finally understood that the woman he had tried to erase had become the center of the room. Aaliyah held the badge for a long second before clipping it back onto her scrubs. The sound was small, a soft click. But in that room, it felt louder than Richard Whitman's slap. Richard's face twisted as if the badge itself had betrayed him. He stepped forward, but Lieutenant Grace Brooks moved first. Not fast, not dramatic. Just one clean step between him and Aaliyah. Mr. Whitman, she said, I would advise you not to approach her again. Richard stopped. His nostrils flared. This is my hospital. Lieutenant Brooks looked around the emergency room, at the beds, at the staff, at Isaiah Coleman sitting upright with a fresh bandage on his head, at Aaliyah standing with rain still drying on her jacket. No, she said, it is a hospital. That distinction matters. The words cut through him. A few nurses looked at each other. One older man waiting with his wife near triage lowered his newspaper. His reached for his hand. They had not known the whole story, but they knew the sound of truth when it entered a room. Richard forced a laugh. Are you threatening legal action? Lieutenant Brooks did not blink. I am documenting facts. Hayes to Dr. Marshall. Doctor, I need Chief Coleman properly evaluated. Neurological check, imaging if indicated, and a written record of the initial wound care. No shortcuts. No retaliation. Marshall nodded. Yes, Commander. Richard snapped his head toward him. You take medical direction from me. Marshall looked at Richard, then at Isaiah. Something changed in the doctor's face. Not courage like a movie. Something quieter. A tired man remembering why he became a doctor. No, Mr. Whitman, he said. Medical direction comes from the patient's condition. The room held its breath. Richard stared at him. Marshall's voice shook, but he did not stop. He needs observation. He needed emergency care when he arrived. Nurse Brooks gave it. That is the truth. Brianna looked at Marshall like he had just opened a door she had been afraid to touch. Kelly stepped beside Alia. The security guard, whose name tag read Aaron, swallowed hard. I can pull the camera footage, he said quietly. Richard turned on him. You will do no such thing without authorization. Aaron's face went pale. Then he looked at Alia's red cheek. I saw what happened, he said, and the cameras saw it too. Richard's control slipped another inch. Alia felt it all around her. Not victory, not satisfaction. Something heavier. People beginning to choose the truth after choosing silence too long. She had seen this before in the military. A room changes when the first person speaks. The second person breathes easier. The third no longer feels alone. Hayes stepped closer to Richard. You built a culture where people fear you more than they trust their own conscience. Richard's mouth opened, but Hayes kept going. That does not make you strong. It makes this place unsafe. Unsafe. The word landed differently in a hospital. It spread through the nurses' station, through the waiting area, through the eyes of every person who had ever sat in a plastic chair, hoping someone would care enough to help them. Richard pointed toward Alia. She made a decision beyond her authority. Alia looked at him. My authority came from his bleeding, she said. No one spoke. She took one step forward. When a person is hurt, the first question cannot be, can they pay? It cannot be, do they look important? It cannot be, will helping them make my supervisor angry? The first question has to be, are they still breathing? Her voice slowed, because one day, every person in this room will be on the other side of that question. Kelly wiped at her cheek. Brianna bowed her head. Even Isaiah closed his eyes. Richard shook his head, but his voice had lost its force. You are emotional. Elisa's gaze stayed steady. No, she said. I am experienced. Hayes looked at Lieutenant Brooks. She nodded and pulled out her phone. I am contacting the hospital board liaison listed in your public compliance records, she said. I am also advising that all relevant video footage be preserved. Richard's face hardened. You cannot just call my board. Lieutenant Brooks gave him a polite look. Watch me. She stepped away and began speaking in a low voice near the nurse's station. Richard looked around again. This time, nobody moved to help him. Then the sliding doors opened. A woman in a beige trench coat entered, carrying an umbrella and a leather briefcase. Her silver hair was pulled back. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp. Richard went still. Madeline Carter, chairwoman of Mercy Ridge's board, looked from the helicopter outside to the Navy officers, then to Alia's bruised cheek. I was 5 minutes away when I got the call, she said. Her voice was controlled. Too controlled. Richard tried to smile. Madeline, this is a misunderstanding. She looked at him. A misunderstanding does not leave a handprint on a nurse's face. The room went quiet again. Madeline turned to Alia. Ms. Brooks, I am sorry. Alia did not answer at first. Apologies had never healed everything, but a real one could at least open the door. Madeline faced Richard. Until further review, you are relieved of active administrative authority. Richard's lips parted. You cannot do that. Madeline's eyes hardened. I just did. And for the first time all day, Alia Brooks saw Richard Whitman understand what it felt like to lose power in front of a room that refused to look away. Richard Whitman stared at Madeline Carter, as if she had spoken in a language he did not understand. Relieved of authority, the words hung above him, sharp and public. For years, Richard had walked through Mercy Ridge with the easy certainty of a man whose name opened doors before his hand touched the knob. Department heads changed their tone when he entered. Nurses stood straighter. Residents stopped laughing. Even patients seemed to sense that he was not there to comfort them. He was there to measure cost. Now he stood in the middle of his own emergency room, surrounded by people who had watched him strike a nurse, and no one was looking away. Madeline took one step closer. "Richard, surrender your access badge to hospital security." His face flushed. "Madeline, you are making a serious mistake." "No," she said. "I am preventing one from becoming a lawsuit, a licensing investigation, and a moral failure we can never explain to this community." Lieutenant Grace Brooks stood silently near the nurse's station, still on the phone, her eyes tracking every word. Commander Hayes remained beside Aaliyah, but he did not touch her shoulder. He knew better. People who survive public humiliation do not always need comfort first. Sometimes they need space to remain standing. Richard's hand moved toward his badge, then stopped. "This is absurd," he said. "I disciplined an employee who violated intake protocol. That is all." Kelly Monroe let out a breath that sounded almost like disbelief. "You slapped her," she said. Richard turned. "I suggest you stop talking." Kelly's face went pale, but she did not step back. Her hands shook at her sides. "I stopped talking once," she said. "I am not doing it twice." Brianna moved beside her. "Me too," she said softly. Dr. Marshall stepped forward next, slower than the others, but with a steadiness that made Richard's expression darken. "I will provide a written statement," Marshall said. Mr. Coleman required immediate wound care. Nurse Brooks acted within the ethical duty of emergency stabilization. Richard's lips tightened. "You people have no idea how hospitals operate." Aaliyah spoke before anyone else could. "Then maybe that is the problem." Every head turned. Her voice was quiet, not bitter, not loud, but it carried like a clean blade. Maybe too many people learned how hospitals operate and forgot why they exist. Madeline looked at her with something like grief. Richard laughed once. "This is emotional theater." Isaiah Coleman leaned back on the bed, tired but clear-eyed. "No," he said. "It is accountability. Men like you always confuse the two." The old veteran's voice was not strong, but it had weight. It came from years of command tents, funeral flags, and hospital waiting rooms where families prayed for someone to tell them the truth. Richard turned away from him. Madeline gestured to Aaron, the security guard. "Mr. Whitman's badge, please." Aaron hesitated only a second this time. Then he walked forward. Richard looked at him with pure contempt. "You work for me." Aaron's jaw tightened. "I work for the hospital." He held out his hand. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Richard unclipped the badge from his jacket and slapped it into Aaron's palm. A smaller sound than the slap he had given Aaliyah, but somehow heavier. Madeline turned to Lieutenant Brooks. "Please advise Commander Hayes that Mercy Ridge will preserve all footage, records, and personnel communications related to this incident." Lieutenant Brooks ended her call and nodded. "Already noted." Richard's eyes flashed. "You are treating me like a criminal." Madeline looked at Alyssa's cheek again. "I am treating this like evidence." Aaliyah lowered her eyes for a moment. The room blurred at the edges, not from weakness, from the sudden release of being believed. She had not realized how tightly she had been holding herself together until people began saying the truth out loud. Hayes noticed. His voice softened. "Petty Officer Brooks." She looked up. "Do you need medical attention?" Aaliyah almost said no. The word rose automatically, trained by years of pushing past pain. Then she stopped. She looked at the young nurses watching her. Kelly with tears on her cheeks. Brianna gripping pen with a medication cart. Even Aaron, ashamed and trying to repair one small piece of what had happened. Aaliyah understood then that refusing care would teach the wrong lesson. "Yes," she said. "I would like my cheek examined." Brianna moved immediately. "I can help." Aaliyah nodded. "Thank you." That simple acceptance shifted the room in a quiet way. It reminded them that strength was not pretending nothing hurt. Strength was allowing truth to be treated. Dr. Marshall moved toward Isaiah. "Chief Coleman, let us get you back on the monitor and run a full neurological exam." Isaiah gave a tired smile. "Took you long enough, Doctor." Marshall smiled back, faint but real. "Yes, sir." It did. Madeline faced Richard one final time. "You will leave this clinical area now. Human Resources and Counsel will meet you upstairs." Richard looked from her to Hayes, then to Alia. His mouth opened, maybe to apologize, maybe to defend himself again. But Alia turned away before he could decide. That was the first power she took back. Not rage, not revenge. Refusal. Richard walked toward the elevator with Aaron behind him. The staff parted, not out of fear now, but judgment. As these elevator doors closed, he looked smaller than he had all day. In the emergency room, rain continued to streak the windows. The helicopter waited outside, and Alia Brooks sat down in a patient chair, while Brianna gently lifted an ice pack to her cheek. For the first time since the slap, she let herself exhale. Brianna's hands were gentle, but the ice still made Alia flinch. "Sorry," Brianna whispered. "It is okay," Alia said. But Brianna knew it was not okay. Everyone in the emergency room knew it now. The problem was not just a slap. The slap was only the part loud enough for the room to hear. Under it was something older, something that had been living in policies, tones, side glances, and quiet decisions long before Richard Whitman raised his hand. Madeline Carter stood near the nurses' station with Lieutenant Grace Brooks. Their voices were low, but the mood between them was serious. "We will need the security footage preserved immediately," Lieutenant Brooks said. "Original files, no edits, no overwrites." Madeline nodded. "I will have our compliance officer lock the system." "Not later," Lieutenant Brooks said. "Now?" Madeline looked toward the hallway where Richard had disappeared. She understood. Men like Richard often did their most dangerous work after they lost the room. Aaron was already moving toward the security office. "I will handle it," he said. His voice sounded different now, less like permission, more like responsibility. Across the room, Dr. Marshall was examined as Isaiah Coleman under a bright exam light. He held up one finger and moved it slowly from left to right. "Follow my finger, please." Isaiah did, then sighed. "I have been through worse than a sidewalk." Marshall gave him a careful look. "That may be true, Chief Coleman, but sidewalks can still win." Isaiah almost smiled. "Fair enough." Marshall checked his pupils, then his balance, then asked questions in a steady, practiced rhythm. Full name, date of birth, current location, recent memory. Isaiah answered each one clearly, but when Marshall gently touched near the edge of the bandage, the old man's jaw tightened. "Still hurts," Marshall said. "Did not come here for a spa day," Isaiah muttered. Brianna laughed before she could stop herself. The sound was small, human, needed. Alia heard it and looked over. For the first time, the emergency room sounded like a place where people were still trying to care for each other. Then Commander Hayes stepped beside her. "May I sit?" he asked. Alia nodded. He pulled a chair close, leaving enough space between them. He was a commander, but in that moment he did not wear command like armor. He sat like a man visiting someone after a long battle. "You disappeared after discharge," he said. Alia kept the ice against her cheek. "I left the Navy. That is not the same thing." She looked at him. Hayes accepted the correction before she said it. "No," he said softly, "it is not." A monitor beeped steadily behind them. Rain tapped the windows. The helicopter lights pulsed outside, red and white, against the wet pavement. Alia lowered the ice pack. "I did not know how to be thanked," she said. Hayes did not interrupt. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had stitched Isaiah's wound. The same hands that once held pressure inside a moving helicopter while a young Marine begged not to die. After Kandahar, everyone called me a hero. At ceremonies, in reports, at hospitals, but at night I could still hear them. The ones I saved and the ones I could not. Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes changed. Not breaking, remembering. So I came here, she said. I thought if I became just a nurse in a regular emergency room, maybe the work would feel simple again. Hayes looked toward Richard's empty path. And did it? Aaliyah gave a tired breath. No, people still bleed the same. Hayes nodded slowly. That is why good medics matter. She shook her head. Good medics are not supposed to become headlines. No, Hayes said. But bad leadership often needs witnesses. Those words stayed between them. At the nurse's station, Kelly overheard enough to lower her eyes. She had been thinking of Aaliyah as brave all afternoon. Now she understood, bravery was not a clean thing. It came with memories. It came with weight. It came with nights nobody else saw. Madeline ended a call and turned to the room. Everyone, listen to me. The emergency room quieted. Mercy Ridge is initiating an immediate internal review, she said. Mr. Whitman has been relieved pending investigation. Any staff member who witnessed the incident will be asked for a statement. No one will be punished for telling the truth. Kelly let out a breath. Brianna closed her eyes. Madeline looked at Aaliyah. Ms. Brooks, your employment status will be restored while this matter is reviewed. You will be placed on paid administrative leave, only if you request time away. Richard would have called that damage control, but Aaliyah heard something else in it. Choice. She stood slowly. With respect, she said, I do not need leave right now. Hayes looked at her, surprised. Aaliyah turned toward Isaiah's bed. I started care on a patient. I would like to finish my chart. The room went still again. Not from fear, from awe, doctor. Marshall looked at her for a long moment, then stepped aside. Of course, Nurse Brooks. Aaliyah walked back to the workstation. Her cheek was bruised. Her scrubs were damp. Her hands were steady. She sat at the computer, entered her password, and opened Isaiah Coleman's chart. The first line she'd typed was simple. Patient presented with active bleeding after fall outside emergency entrance. Then she paused. The room watched her. Aaliyah continued typing. Treatment initiated due to immediate medical need. Commander Hayes stood behind her, silent. And in that quiet, every person in Mercy Ridge understood something Richard Whitman never had. Dignity is not given by a title. It is shown by what you do when someone needs help. Aaliyah's fingers moved across the keyboard with the same calm precision she had once used to pack wounds under gunfire. Every sentence mattered. Not because she was trying to protect herself, because records saved lives too. Patient found outside emergency entrance after apparent fall. Active bleeding from forehead laceration. Uneven breathing noted. Patient brought inside for immediate evaluation and wound stabilization. She paused, listening to the soft rhythm of Isaiah's monitor across the room. Steady. That sound did something to her chest. It loosened a knot she had carried since the moment Richard's hand struck her face. Isaiah was alive. That was the point. That had always been the point. Behind her, Commander Hayes spoke quietly with Madeline Carter near the triage desk. Lieutenant Brooks stood beside them, scrolling through a secure tablet. Kelly and Brianna returned to their patients, but their eyes kept drifting back toward Aaliyah, as if they were afraid she might vanish again. Dr. Marshall approached the workstation. His voice was careful. Nurse Brooks. Aaliyah kept typing. Yes, doctor, I reviewed Chief Coleman's neurological exam. He is stable, but I am ordering a CT scan due to age and head trauma. Aaliyah nodded. Good call. He stood there a moment longer. I should have stepped in sooner. The keys stopped. Aaliyah looked up. Marshall's face carried the exhausted shame of a decent man who had waited too long to become brave. I watched him humiliate you, he said. Then I watched him hit you, and I calculated my own risk before I thought about yours. Aaliyah said nothing. Marshall swallowed. I am sorry. She studied him for a moment. The emergency room noise moved around them. Wheels rolling, curtains sliding, a nurse calling for lab pickup. Life continuing because hospitals never stop for anyone's guilt. Finally, Aaliyah spoke. Do better next time. Marshall nodded. I will. No speech, no absolution, just a door left open. That was enough. Across the room, Aaron returned from security with a hard drive, sealed in a clear evidence bag. He handed it to Lieutenant Brooks. "Full camera export from the emergency department," he said. "Main entrance, trauma bay, nurses station." I had compliance lock the files. Lieutenant Brooks looked at him. "Did anyone ask you not to?" Aaron's eyes flicked toward the elevators, not directly. That answer told them enough. Madeline's face hardened. Richard made a call. Aaron nodded once. From upstairs. To security administration. Madeline closed her eyes for half a second. "Then call hospital counsel," she said. "Tell them Mr. Whitman is not to access any internal system, pending investigation." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The hospital was beginning to cleanse itself, not with outrage, but with procedure finally serving truth instead of power. Then the elevator doors opened. Richard stepped out with a hospital attorney, a thin man in a gray suit named Paul Everett. Richard had removed his tie. His face was flushed, but he had rebuilt his mask. Paul walked quickly toward Madeline. "Madeline, I strongly recommend we move this discussion to a private conference room." Commander Hayes turned. The emergency room seemed to tighten. Paul lowered his voice. "This is a sensitive personnel matter. Public exposure could harm the hospital." Isaiah spoke from his bed before Madeline could answer. "No. What harmed this hospital happened in public." Paul blinked. Richard's jaw clenched. "Chief Coleman," Paul said carefully, "we are concerned about your care." Isaiah gave him a hard look. "You are concerned about your liability." The words landed clean. Alia rose from the workstation. She had finished the chart. Her badge caught the fluorescent light. Richard saw her standing again, and his anger sharpened. "You are creating a hostile environment," he said. Aaliyah looked at him calmly. "No, Mr. Whitman, I survived one." Kelly froze behind the medication cart. Brianna's eyes widened. Even Paul Everett stopped moving. Richard pointed at her. "You see? This is why she cannot remain on staff. She is openly insubordinate." Madeline stepped forward. "Richard, stop talking." But Richard could not. Men who are used to control often mistake silence for defeat. And when silence ends, they unravel. "She disobeyed a direct order," he snapped. "She treated a man without clearance. She challenged leadership. She embarrassed this institution." Hayes walked toward him slowly. "No," he said. "She embarrassed you." Richard turned on him. "This does not concern the Navy." Hayes stopped inches away. "A veteran called me because a medic who once saved Marines was assaulted for saving him." His voice dropped. "That concerns me." Paul raised both hands. "Commander, no one is disputing Ms. Brooks' service." Aaliyah's eyes stayed on Richard. "That is not the issue," she said. "Then what is?" Richard demanded. Aaliyah took one breath. "The issue is that you would have treated me the same if I had never worn a uniform, and that should bother everyone here." Silence. This time, it did not feel dramatic. It felt true. Madeline turned to Paul. "Mr. Everett, prepare formal notice. Mr. Whitman is suspended pending external investigation." Richard stared at her. "External?" Madeline nodded. "State Health Department, Nursing Board, Hospital Board Ethics Committee, and if Ms. Brooks chooses, law enforcement." Richard's face drained. Aaliyah looked down at her hands. The room waited for her anger. But she gave them something harder. "I do not want revenge," she said. "I want this place to become safe for the next nurse, who does the right thing when no one important is watching." Isaiah closed his eyes. Hayes looked at her with quiet pride, and Richard Whitman finally had no answer. The emergency room did not return to normal right away. It could not. Too much truth had been spoken under those white lights. Too many people had seen the difference between authority and leadership. Richard Whitman stood near the elevator with his attorney, no longer commanding the space, only occupying it. His shoulders were stiff. His face was pale. The man who had once made others tremble now looked like someone waiting for consequences to arrive. Madeline Carter signed the suspension notice on a tablet, then handed it to Paul Everett. "Effective immediately," she said. Paul looked at Richard. Richard did not reach for the document. Madeline's voice hardened. "You will leave through the administrative exit. You will not contact staff. You will not access hospital systems." Any attempt to interfere with this review will be documented. Richard looked past her toward Aliyah. For one brief second, something like anger crossed his face again. Then he saw Commander Hayes watching him. He saw Kelly standing with her chin lifted. He saw Aaron holding the evidence bag. He saw Dr. Marshall beside Isaiah's bed. He had no audience left, only witnesses. Without another word, Richard turned and walked toward the hall. His shoes struck the floor in short, bitter sounds. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. Paul followed. The doors closed. This time, no one followed him with fear. Aliyah stood at the workstation, her chart complete. The ice pack lay beside the keyboard. Her cheek still burned, but the pain had changed. It was no longer the center of her body. It was only proof. Proof that something had happened. Proof that she had endured it. Proof that people had finally stopped pretending. Dr. Marshall rolled Isaiah toward radiology himself. "Chief Coleman," he said, "we are going to get that scan done properly." Isaiah looked over at Aliyah. "You coming with me, medic?" Aliyah gave a small smile. "I am a nurse here, Chief." Isaiah smiled back. "Same hands." The words landed softly, not as a title, as a blessing. Brianna walked beside the bed, checking the monitor leads. Kelly followed with the chart. They moved together now, not like frightened employees, but like a team remembering what medicine was supposed to feel like. Commander Hayes stayed behind with Aliyah near the nurses' station. "You know," he said, "power is not always the person with the office." Aliyah looked toward the hallway where Richard had vanished. "No," she said, "sometimes power is the person who refuses to become cruel after being hurt." Hayes nodded. That was the lessons he had hoped others heard too. Not that a helicopter had landed. Not that a board chair had suspended a CEO. Those were the loud parts, the easier parts. The harder lesson was quieter. A man had collapsed outside a hospital, and a nurse had seen him as a human being before she saw a file, a balance, or a risk. That should not have been extraordinary. But in a world where systems often teach people to look away, compassion had become an act of courage. Madeline approached Aliyah with both hands folded in front of her. "Miss Brooks, Mercy Ridge owes you more than an apology." Aliyah looked at her. "Mercy Ridge owes its patients better." Madeline absorbed that. Then she nodded. "Then that is where we begin." By evening, the rain had stopped. The helicopter was gone. The parking lot shone under the amber lights, wet and quiet. Inside the emergency room, the work continued. A child with a fever. A construction worker with a broken wrist. An elderly woman afraid to admit she had chest pain. Each one came through the doors carrying fear, and this time the staff moved differently. They looked up faster. They listened longer, they remembered. Aliyah stood near triage, her badge back on her chest. Her cheek was bruised, but her posture was steady. She was not untouched by what happened. No one is. But healing does not mean nothing hurt. Healing means the hurt no longer gets the final word. Isaiah returned from radiology with no serious bleeding found. When he passed Aliyah, he raised 2 fingers in a tired salute. She shook her head. "Rest, Chief." He closed his eyes, still smiling. That night, Mercy Ridge did not become perfect. No place does in one day. But something had cracked open. Fear had lost some of its grip. Silence had lost some of its power. And one nurse, once dismissed as a rookie, reminded an entire hospital that dignity is not granted by rank, money, or title. It is protected by ordinary people, brave enough to do the right thing while others are still deciding. If this story reminded you that compassion still matters, like this video, subscribe for more stories of courage and justice, and comment these 3 words. Never stay silent.